Hello and welcome to yet another video. In my continued coverage of all of the content that was teased during the Kickstarter campaign for Prelude 2, I'll talk about the new and changed milestones and awards today. The game so far included 30 milestones and awards that were determined by the map you are playing. With the new content, we will get a system of modular milestones and awards and also 43 new ones to make sure that you can play with a new set every time that you set up the game from scratch. But let's get started. First of all, let's quickly go through the list of milestones and awards that were unchanged. Of the 15 original milestones, only Energizer, Gardener, Mayor, Planner, Rim Settler and Diversifier were unchanged. The rest was either cut, buffed or nerfed. Let's go through these. Polar Explorer was cut for obvious reasons. It was a milestone specifically designed for Hellas, a map where you typically did not want to start converting greeneries in the bottom two rows. And sometimes did anyway, just for this milestone. Polar Explorer might be completely unbalanced on other maps, especially on some of the new ones. Specialist, however, was cut since there will now be 3 different milestones taking its place, as the ones focusing on high production. It just would have been redundant. Ecologist, Tactician, Terraformer, Tycoon, Builder and Legend were all changed, and with the exception of Ecologist, they have all been buffed. So let's talk about that outlier first. Ecologist now only recognizes microbe tags, but still requires you to play 4 of them. That's a significant nerf, as plant tags are generally much stronger. So not only do you lose a lot of potential cards to play for this milestone, but the average strength of the applicable cards also goes down. I get the need to nerf these milestones, but this was maybe a bit too harsh. Probably would have sufficed to just increase the tags needed to 5, but leave it as the whole bio set. Tactician and Legend now only require 4 instead of the 5 respective cards. I really don't get these changes. Tactician was a bit on the harder side, but nothing out of the ordinary, and Legend was actually pretty easy in my opinion. So for me there was no need to buff these milestones, but we'll see how they play out. Builder got a change I can understand. With all expansions, the percentage of building tags in the deck shrinks significantly, so 8 was pretty hard to reach. 7 seems to be a good compromise. Also, Terraformer was changed to just 29 TR. I don't know whether this is the case for when you're playing with Turmoil as well, since their Terraformer is usually set to 26 TR due to balancing reasons. But the biggest change comes to Tycoon. Instead of requiring 15 blue or green cards, it now requires just 10. I get that this milestone was one of the hardest, but 10? Holy crap, that's a big change. I think 12 would have been the more reasonable buff. But let's get to the awards. There, we actually only saw 2 changes. Industrialist got renamed to Supplier, and I really don't know why. There's already a prelude with that name, but whatever, it doesn't change the gameplay. Similarly to the removal of Polar Explorer, Desert Settler was also cut. Again, this makes total sense, as this award was balanced around the shitty southern hemisphere on Elysium, and this award would have probably been broken on other maps. With 3 milestones and awards getting cut from the game, we actually get 43 new ones, instead of the 40 I initially thought. 22 milestones and 21 awards. Let's go through these new ones one by one. We immediately start off with probably the most interesting milestone in the game, Briber. It doesn't actually have a requirement, you just have to pay 12 MC extra for it, so 20 in total. Firstly, you might think, wait a moment, that's a crazy deal. Playing 7 building tags to claim Builder, for example, is much more expensive than 12 MC, and this holds true for basically any other milestone. However, playing these 7 building tags for Builder, or 3 Jovians for Rim Settler, or 4 Microbes for Ecologist, does get you something else in addition to the milestone. Be it points, development, card draw, or whatever. You don't just play these cards for the milestone. You play them because they're good cards first and foremost, or at least that's what you should do. 12 MC you spend on Briber doesn't get you anything other than the milestone, so you will have to carefully consider whether you want to do that. One last thing about Briber, the new corp Nurgle Enterprises only pays 12 MC and not 20 for this milestone, so for this corp it's basically a no-brainer to fund it. Next up, we get Coast Guard. You can claim this milestone as soon as you have 3 tiles next to oceans. This is exactly what you want to do in the early game anyways, provided you're going for a ground game. Because in the early game, an ocean walk, where you place oceans to get plant placement bonuses, and then convert these plants into greeneries next to the previously placed oceans is a really efficient way to score points and get economic development at the same time. A great award for anyone who likes this playstyle and really dangerous in combination with Gardener. Engineer can be claimed whenever you reach 10 energy and or heat prod combined. This can happen in Gen 1, just imagine Mohole plus Saletta. A great award for rushing players, but one that can also be stolen by engine players with some science tags, since Quantum and Mass can get you up to 10 prod in just 2 actions. Also, keep in mind that if the Calvinists are in power, you can relatively cheaply get power and heat prod from their ability as often as you want. Farmer requires 5 animal and or microbe resources combined. There are certain cards that make this really easy, for example tardigrades or psychrophiles, especially in combination with Enceladus if you're playing with colonies. You will most likely rely on microbes for this milestone, as animals often have mid to late game requirements and cannot be accumulated that quickly with their respective colony tile Miranda. Certainly an interesting milestone that makes certain cards much better. I love Vitor, and Vitor loves the milestone Philanthrope. It requires 5 cards with non-negative VP icons, and not only does Vitor get a rebate of 3 MC on these, but it also starts with such an icon on the card itself. Of course, for all other corps it's a bit counterintuitive to play point cards in the early game, but there are some good ones like Natural Preserve, Marsu or Earthcat. And maybe if you want to claim this milestone, you'll even end up playing Dust Seals for once. Jesus Christ, what did they think when they designed Forester? It requires 3 plant prod, which is insanely easy to reach, and something that you often want to get regardless of this milestone. I mean, you can get it by just playing Ecoline and getting Archaebacteria down. This means you can claim this milestone in your first turn. What the fuck? I mentioned earlier that Specialist got removed and replaced by 3 new milestones. We already went over Engineer, which I consider as the first replacement milestone for Specialist. But what production did you most often use for Specialist? MC Prod, of course. And this is the production you need 12 of to claim Fundraiser. It makes it just a bit harder to claim this milestone, and now it doesn't suffice to just play Allied Banks and Business Empire to claim this milestone. Good. Next up, we get an award that actually cannot be used on all maps. Geologist requires 3 tiles on or around volcanic areas, and since not all of the maps have them, you'll need to replace this milestone when playing with a map that doesn't include them. Generally, I think that the volcanic areas on Tharsis and Elysium are quite good, and at least some of the surrounding areas are as well. So I think this milestone should be quite easily achievable for ground game players. Friends of mine actually made a custom award for their game a while ago that counted the number of oceans you placed throughout the game. We won't get that award, but we will get the milestone Hydrologist, which can be claimed once you've placed 4 oceans. For the purpose of counting oceans, you'll actually mark them with your player cubes. They won't count as your tiles though. Again, this is a milestone that can theoretically be claimed in Gen 1 with Great Aquifer and Ice Asteroid, for example. Competing for this milestone can be dangerous though, since your opponent could have kelp farming or algae on hand. Devastating cards if played early. Another ground game milestone comes in the form of Landshaper. It requires 1 city, greenery and special tile. While you can use standard projects or conversions for cities and greeneries, you'll need to get quite lucky to draw a special tile. This also means that special tiles increase in value dramatically, and this is in addition to most of them being already super good without this milestone. We also will get our first turmoil milestone, Lobbyist, which requires you to have 7 delegates in parties. Party leader and the chairman do also count. This milestone is obviously great for Septem Tribus, a corp which wants to place 6 delegates in Gen 1 anyways. For every other corporation, this milestone is either going to require some heavy investment or quite some time. Because alternatively to placing a lot of delegates with money, you can just place your free one each gen in parties that won't win the election, so they stay there. But as I said, going only with this strat is going to take a lot of time, in which your opponents could claim all other milestones. Also, it's probably unlikely that you're able to accumulate 7 delegates without ever winning the election. And lastly, Martian Media Center is a really nice card for the race to claim this milestone. Next up, we have Merchant, a milestone which requires you to have 2 of each standard resource after claiming it. This does not necessarily mean that you need the production of each resource though. You can get plants, steel and titanium on all of the maps via placement bonuses, while you can get heat on Hellas, for example. Also, one of the new maps, Utopia Planitia, allows you to gain power as a placement bonus. And in addition to that, when playing with colonies, you can gain any standard resource via trading. Just keep in mind that you'll need to fund this award while you have 10 MC, since you need 2 MC left over after. Metallurgist requires you to have 6 steel and or titanium prot combined. In my opinion, this is actually quite hard to reach. I mean, Mining Guild can get there quite fast, but for all other corps, can you invest that much money in the early game to get up mineral prot? And do you find the right cards for it? Miners in the game as well, it might be really beneficial to try to get this milestone though. We also get a colonies-based milestone in the form of Pioneer. It can be claimed once you have 4 colonies. Placing a few colonies is something you almost always want to do anyways, as trading is super strong. But this also means that the best colony placing cards are heavily sought after. And this means that you might have to SP 1 or 2 colonies for this milestone. And then the question arises, is it worth it? Are all colony tiles really that good? I mean, if you get Research Colony and or Spaceport Colony, this doesn't need to be the case, as then you can potentially stack multiple colonies on the best planets. Also, Poseidon is absolutely S tier when this milestone is in the game. Not only do you get a head start on it, but you'll probably also profit even more from your ability, as everyone is incentivized to place colonies more than normally. Planetologist is one of my favorite new milestones. It requires you to get 2 Jovian, Earth and Venus tags. I love playing around with the planet symbols and the synergies between them. This milestone probably won't be one of the easiest to get, as Jovian tags are quite rare and Venus tags usually quite weak, but I still love the concept. The last milestone that I think was designed to partially offset the removal of Specialist is Producer. It requires a combined total production of 16. Negative MC prot actually subtracts from the total. There are so many ways to go for this milestone, it's actually quite amazing. It's probably still quite a bit easier for engine players to reach this threshold, but cards like Soletta or Mohol are quite potent for this milestone as well, and can maybe allow rushing players to also have a shot at this. If you like Scientist, you will love Researcher. It requires 4 science tags, which is such a low number that I think it will be quite swingy and luck-based, similar to Rim Settler. With all expansions, science tags aren't even that rare. Around 14% of cards hold a science tag. Yes, some of them have high requirements, but you can easily get this at the first gen if you get a lucky opening hand, and wild tags are also incredibly useful for this milestone. Talking about swingy and luck-based milestones, next we have Spacefarer. There are 64 non-event space tags in the game, so around 17%. That's an even higher percentage than science tags. Again, yes, some of these cards are really expensive, so playing 4 of them can theoretically be pretty hard. But this is still a milestone that you can sometimes easily claim in Gen 1 without anyone being able to do anything about it, and I don't like that. Next up, we have Sponsor, Credicor's favorite milestone. It can be claimed when you've played 3 cards with a base cost of 20 MC or more. I guess events do not count for this, making it quite a bit harder. Still, Credicor has a pretty big advantage on this, but you still need to draw into these cards, so a bit of luck is required, as with most milestones. We'll get another planet-based milestone in the form of Teran, which requires 5 Earth tags. There are way less Earth tags in the deck than Science or Space tags, when playing with all expansions at least, so I really don't get why this milestone requires 5 tags instead of 4. Yes, Earth tags are usually more early game focused cards in comparison to Space and Science tags, but the difference in the amount of cards is staggering. But next up we get another really interesting milestone. Thor requires you to have increased the heat 5 times to claim it. You'll mark the heat steps you've done with player cubes next to the temperature scale. I really like that there's a new milestone favoring a more rushy playstyle, as most of these milestones favor engine. One thing to note for when you're playing with this milestone, the already great Prelude Huge Asteroid gets even better and is basically a must pick now. And lastly for milestones, we will get Trader. This one requires 3 different resources on cards, and I think this is actually quite hard. Out of the 3 most common special resources, 2 are often locked behind high requirements, animals and microbes. Only floater cards can often be played immediately. And cards with other special resources are actually few and far between. There are few asteroid accumulating cards in the deck, but if you've ever played Asterodil, you know how hard it can be to find those. And the other special resources like fighters or science resources are only used on 1, 2, or maybe 3 different cards. I think this milestone might be super hard to get. But let's get to the awards. The first new one is named Administrator, and you win it by playing the most cards without any text. This first award is immediately an interesting one. There are only 31 cards without text in the entire game, making them quite rare. Also, quite a few of these cards are just straight up bad, like red suits or micromills. Additionally, except for community services, there is little to no combo potential for cards without text. This made cards without text already feel a bit underwhelming, as if something was missing from them. Administrator changes this up a bit, especially because there are so few of them. Every card without text that you play has an enormous impact on this award. This also is the case for Incorporation and Preludes. Interesting award for sure. To counteract the fact that Ecologist was nerfed to only count microbe tags from now on, we will get Biologist, which awards the player with the most biotags, so plant, animal and microbe tags. These tags are some of the best in the game, especially plant and animal tags, since they are part of the green combo. This means that you nearly always want to play these tags anyways, and whether you win this award will somewhat depend on luck. Insects and NRA are already 2 of the best cards in the game, and the new award Botanist will only reinforce that. You win it by having the most plant prot at the end of the game. Obviously, Ecoline has a small advantage on this award, but with so many great plant production cards like the aforementioned insects and NRA, but also kelp farming and trees, for example, that everyone wants to play if they get the chance, this award is really anyone's to grab. Next up, we have Collector, which is won by the player with the most different types of resources both on the player board and on cards. In playing with all expansions, there are, of course, the 6 standard resources, as well as 8 special resources. Animals, microbes, science resources, asteroids, fighters, camp resources, floaters, and the unnamed resources on self-replicating robots. Some of these resources are only present on a few, sometimes really bad cards, looking at you, Security Fleet, so this award makes these cards significantly better. But this award also changes your late game decision making. Same as in a minor fight, you sometimes do not want to use up all your available resources just to try and win this award. Maybe you don't want to draw a card with Olympus Conference if that's your only science resource, or you played Tardigrades last gen just to get 1 microbe. Interesting award, but I think this could also end up in a lot of draws. Next up, we got Constructor, an award that counts the number of cities and colonies combined. Given that the choice of colony tiles isn't absolutely horrible, colonies are already really strong, especially if you get to place them with some of the absolute busted colony cards. Cities can also be great if you have a lot of plant prot, but usually not quite as strong, especially in the early game. What I like with this award is that these 2 parts of it, cities and colonies, often don't go hand in hand, as a ground game and a colony-centric game doesn't usually work well together. And this means that this award isn't an auto-win for a specific corporation. Of course, some are better than others, for example Tharsis or Poseidon, but everyone should have a good shot at this award. Finally, we will get some love for Thorgate. Electrician awards the player with the most power tags, and since Thorgate starts off with 1 and has a significant discount on all of them, this should really help this corp to secure this award most of the time. Of course, you will still need to draw plenty of good power cards, but with Thorgate you can play these cards as quasi-heat producers and be fine with it. Of course, if you're playing with colonies, everybody will want to play some power prot, so that will make the competition a bit tougher. Simple award that boosts the significance of the power tag. I like it. Next up, we get to Forecaster, which is the award counterpart of Tactician. The player with the most cards with requirements will win this award. While I think Inventrix has a significant advantage on Tactician, I don't think that's the case with Forecaster. You see, Inventrix helps you get down a requirement card early, which is great for the milestone. But for the award, getting these cards down is not time critical. Everyone can play kelp farming eventually, so it will count for Forecaster. Of course, cards with max requirements can be easier to get down later for inventories, or cards that can decrease heavily in value in the late game like Lake Marineris. But this only applies for a few select cards, so I think nearly every corp can have a chance to win this award. Of course, if you're going for a long game with card draw and some nice signs, you will play more green and blue cards and therefore most likely beat your rushing opponents on this award. Next up, we will get Founder, which awards the player with the most tiles adjacent to special tiles. This is really interesting, as owning tiles adjacent to special tiles is usually a bad thing. Tiles like mining rights, commercial district, or nuke zone are often used to either block an ocean walk or a great greenery spot in between 2 or 3 of your opponent's cities. With Founder in the game, this will be a really risky strategy, because while you might block a great conversion spot, you'll also allow them to fund Founder more easily. Especially Commercial District will become almost unplayable if this award is funded. For the next award, we got one that has been around on a few fan-made maps for quite some time. Highlander. It awards the player with the most tiles that are not next to oceans. So again, a ground game centered award, and one that is a bit counterintuitive. Placing tiles next to oceans normally is a really good thing, and is absolutely what you want to do, especially in the early to mid game. So much so that you would rather place your greeneries next to oceans than your cities, just to get that juicy MC rebate. With Highlander, you will have to reconsider that, and this award definitely favors players with a lot of plant prod. Incorporator is the opposite to Celebrity. Instead of incentivizing playing a lot of expensive cards, this award is won by the player who's played the most low-cost cards, specifically those with base MC costs of 10 or less. This seems like an easy to win award if you're going for engine versus a rush opponent. Playing a lot of cheap engine pieces like Sponsors, Mine, Power Plant, Fuel Factory, and so on in the early game can grant you an insurmountable lead that cannot be caught up in the late game. Another great award for engine players comes in the form of Investor. Most Earth Tax is an interesting award. Earth Tax are good, and there are a lot of them in the game. 48 projects, 6 corps, and 3 preludes, to be exact, when playing with all expansions. In terms of projects, that's around 12%. And Earth Tax are great, but the main thing here is it's mostly an engine-favored award again. It's true that there are some amazing Earth Tax for a rush strategy like Nuke Zone or Imported Hydrogen, but the overwhelming majority of the non-event project cards are engine pieces. Next up, we get Landscaper, which awards the player who gets the most connected tiles by the end of the game. Usually this should favor players that go for early conversions and get a really good ocean walk going. But disrupting someone's ocean walk by placing a blocker tile is now even more disruptive with this award in the game. Because your usual response to this move would be to teleport somewhere else on the map with a card like Nuke Zone. But if this now means that you will have 2 large but not large enough groups of tiles at the end of the game, your opponent basically prevented you from funding an award that should usually favor you. Next up, we get Manufacturer. The player with the highest combined steel and heat prod will win this award. For a change, this award is quite balanced between engine and rush players. However, I get the feeling that a few milestones and awards have significant overlap, but I will talk more about that at the end of the video, when I state my general criticism that I have with this expansion. Instead, let's talk about Metropolis, the City Award. Whoever owns the most cities at the end of the game wins this one. And this is actually really interesting. In contrast to Landlord, which is often won by the player with the most greeneries and therefore often favors rushing players, this award probably favors engine players more and allows you to punish unprotected greeneries even more than normally. Suddenly, plopping down a city next to your opponent's greeneries can make sense again, just like back in the early Terraforming Mars days. Now let's talk about Mogul, which awards the player with the most production except MC prod. What are some of the best cards for this? Soletta, Insects, Mass Converter, and Lunar Mining are some examples. I like this award because, like Manufacturer, it can be won by all kinds of strategies. I mean, I just listed 4 cards that grant 4 different production types. I have to say, the production type that I end up with enormous amounts of the most is probably plants. But that's because plant production is so strong in general, and with insects there exists an insane card that can grant you absurd amounts of it. We will actually get a turmoil-centered award as well. Politician awards the player with the most party leaders and influence combined. I think this award is a bit lame, since everyone wants to get as many party leaders as possible anyways, since everyone at the end of the game is worth 1 point. I would have liked an award for the most non-party leader delegates more, but that's just me. The next award is Promoter, which is the counterpart of the milestone Legend. You win it by having played the most events. Straightforward and not too much to say about it. Probably favors Rush a bit more. Suburban awards the player with the most tiles along the edges of the map. This is a really random award in my opinion. The edge tiles are not particularly bad or good on the 3 standard maps at least. If you want to go for this award hard, you'll still have to give up some flexibility in where you want to place tiles. But another ground game focused award is still a good addition to the game. Traveler is won by the player with the most Earth and Jovian text combined. If this doesn't favor engine, then what does? Earth texts are often generally good, especially in the early game, but other than Methane from Titan or Beam from a Thorium asteroid, you often don't want to play a Jovian in a rush ever. They are quite rare and quite specific in what they achieve. The next award is Visionary, and it's actually quite interesting. You win it by having the most cards on hand at the end of the game. Of course, this means that the standard maneuver to sell all of your remaining cards at the end of the game to maximize your MC in case of a tie is obsolete if this award gets funded. But the more interesting part is that selling cards as a stall action suddenly becomes a really bad strategy. Especially if you get some card draw down, you'll often get a lot of useless cards throughout the game, and these are now an even more valuable commodity. I love this award. Do you think Decomposers and Ecological Zone needed a buff? No? Well, screw you, because that's what they will get in the form of Zoologist. It awards the player with the most animal and microbe resources combined, and this makes so many already great cards even better. Even some of the animals or microbe cards that you normally have to think about playing, like pets or tardigrades, get really good because of how early you can get them down. Ants and predators become insanely broken, and you just pray to God that you'll find protected habs if this award gets funded. And then there's Miranda and Enceladus, which can absolutely swing this award as well. If you get 2 fleets and enough power to trade with both of them, you can get so many animals and microbes with these, it's crazy. This was actually the last award to go through, but at the end of this video I want to state some objective criticism that I have with this expansion. Imagine this scenario. 4 of the 5 awards are Miner, Thermalist, Supplier and Manufacturer. And fitting just perfectly, you get the following milestones: Builder, Energizer, Metallurgist and Producer. Just get lots of steel, energy and heat prod and you'll basically win all milestones and awards if you do it right. This heavily favors one playstyle, and if you're not going for it, you basically have no chance on these goals, and probably no chance on winning the game. Yes, the rules state the following. Some goals benefit from the same strategy. Feel free to change goals until you have a set that everyone agrees with. But I think this is just a lazy design philosophy. I remember that there was a fan-made Modular Milestones and Awards expansion that sorted all goals into different categories, and then only allowed a certain number of one category at the same time. Of course, you could implement something like this easily yourself, but I just wish the developers would have done it themselves. But all in all, I'm still happy with this expansion, and very much looking forward to playing with it. Thanks so much for watching. This video was an insane amount of work, so if you enjoyed it, please leave a like and consider subscribing. Also, please check out my Twitch and my Twitter, which are linked in the description. See you in the next video.